Hello everyone and welcome to our next lesson. Just a reminder that I originally developed this course for the BANGTAN Academy Discord community, so if you'd like to find out more, please follow them on Twitter at BANGTAN Academy _ so you can get access to other materials and make friends to study with. You can also find me on Twitter at writer_court or on thebtseffect.com. Hello everyone, welcome back to Learn Korean with BTS. We are now moving on to book 2, so congratulations for finishing book 1. Of course, as we move through book 2, you may want to go back to book 1 just to review, especially if you haven't memorized all the vocabulary yet. That's something that you have to continuously keep up with, so definitely go back and review as we start moving through book 2. But for now, we're going to look at chapter 7, which is the first chapter in book 2. So we are on page 18 now. So after this lecture or before, you can pause, scan the video, and complete the first exercise at the top of the page, which is going to ask you how many hearts each BTS member has. And so this chapter is going to go through counting counters, and it will go through native Korean numbers. So if you remember from book 1, we already covered Sino-Korean numbers. There are 2 number systems in Korean, and it depends upon the situation sometimes which one you're going to have to use. So there are 2 systems you have to memorize. They're quite different, and they are used in specific situations. But, that's something if you accidentally switch your numbers out, someone's probably still going to understand you because they're still going to understand the number. So don't worry about that too much, but just kind of remember as you go along in what sorts of situations you use different number systems. So of course, Sino-Korean numbers are still important. You're going to want to remember those. We use those for telling time, for example. But native Korean numbers are the focus here because we're also going to learn some counters. So kind of like in English, you would put a noun after a counter, a number sometimes. So like 5 albums. In Korean, you're going to use the noun and then a number and then a counter, which we don't really use in English like that. So it is a little strange at first, but just memorize the few that they give you in this chapter. And as you go on, you'll get exposed to more different types of counters. And if you don't know the type of counter to use, you can always just default to one of the counters that I'll show you here in a minute. So first, we're going to look at the native Korean number system. We're going to look at 1 through 10 and then 11 through 20. And of course, the numbers do go on further than that, but they're not really relevant to this lesson. So that's something we can explore later. So the bottom half of page 18 gives you the numbers. I recommend going through this with the language pen so you can hear native pronunciation. I will do my best to read through them right now. Some of them are not pronounced the way they're spelled, just like other words in Korean, due to pronunciation changes. So I will be sure to point those out. So starting with the first line, we have 하나, 둘, 셋, 넷, 다섯, 여섯, 일곱, 여덟, 아홉, 열. So that's 1 through 10. And as you'll see, a lot of those numbers end in the shiot, but it makes like a digit sound. So like 셋, 넷, 다섯, 여섯, they don't sound like a shiot really. So when it's on the bottom, it makes a different sound. It just kind of cuts off like that. So you don't have to pronounce it like it's spelled with a shiot. So like 여섯, it just cuts off like that. And then if you look at number 8, 여덟, it's got 2 consonants in the bottom. It has a riul and a piup, but you don't really pronounce both of those because they're hard to pronounce together. So depending upon what the 2 ending consonants are, sometimes you pronounce the first one, sometimes you pronounce the second one. In 여덟, you pronounce the riul, so 여덟. So then to go 11 through 19, it's kind of like Sino-Korean numbers where you're going to combine the number for 10 and then the number digits for 1 through 9. So 열하나, 열둘, 열셋, 열네, 열다섯, 열여섯, 열일곱, 열여덟, 열아홉. So those get a little harder to say because 열 ends in a riul, which if you have, the empty circle, it's going to carry over that sound a little bit. So for example, 열, 여섯, that middle syllable has the empty circle sound, so of course that's just a vowel on its own. It's just ya, but that rir before it is going to carry over a little bit, so when you say it very quickly, it carries over. There's not really a space in between the two. You don't have to enunciate. It's hard when you're first learning the numbers to say them like that, but that's how native speakers will say it, so it's going to sound a little different. For me, it's even still a little hard to say, so 열여섯, I tend to pause a little bit, but you don't have to pause. You can carry that rir sound over into the next syllable. So the other one that's going to sound different is 14. So you'll see 열 and net, but you don't say net like with a nian, the n sound. You don't say that sound at all because the rir that comes before it in 10, so 열, that sound makes the n another rir. So it's really just two L's, which is really confusing. But so it's not 열 net, it's 열let, 열let. So it's going to carry over that sound and it's just going to be an L sound. And then after 19, of course, 20 is different. So we have 스물, 스물. And we will see in a little bit one of the examples they give you. If you want to go beyond 20, you just put the number after 20. So 스물 is going to be 20. If you want to say 21, you would put 하나, but we don't really use 하나 as a double syllable. It actually condenses to 한. So it's 스물한. So if you were 21, you'd say 스물한 and then 살, which is the counter for age. So 스물한 살. So some of the numbers are going to do that. Not all of them do that, the shortening. But also, too, when you hear someone count 1, 2, 3, you often may hear them just say ha instead of hana because 둘 and 셋 both have one syllable, but hana has two syllables. So some people will say 하나, 둘, 셋, and some people will say 하, 둘, 셋 when they're counting just informally. So these native Korean numbers are the numbers that you use for age. So if you are over 29, you don't have the numbers here to make your age. But if you want to know how to say numbers over 29, I can give you a link to more Korean numbers that go beyond that because each decade has a different sound. So like 열 for 10s and 스물 for 20s, but 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on have different numbers that go in the front, like completely different sounding numbers. And native numbers only go up to 99. There is no native Korean number for 100. They just use 백 from Sino-Korean. So now we're going to move into the first key expression. So this is pages 20 and 21 in your book. So the first key expression is the grammatical construction for 지만. So 지만 is used when the clause contrasts with the previous clause. So the second part of your sentence is a contrast to the first part of your sentence. So it's similar in English to saying something but something else, or even though this something else, and those two things must contrast. They can't be the same. It can't be something that is similar to the first part of the sentence because then this construction wouldn't make sense. So it has to be something that is contrasting against something else. This format is attached to verbs and nouns, and I should say it's actually attached to both verbs, action verbs, and descriptive verbs, and then nouns have a different form. So nouns are going to get either 지만 or 이지만. So for example, like 사과 ends in a vowel, so you're going to put 지만, so 사과지만, like it's an apple, but something else. And if your noun ends in a consonant, it's going to take 이지만 instead. For your verbs, whether they're descriptive or action verbs, it doesn't matter. This 지만 form doesn't have any irregular conjugations. There's not anything in 지만, the construction, to make it irregular. So literally, you're just going to take whatever verb, no matter if it's descriptive or an action verb, or if it's typically irregular, it doesn't matter. You're going to take that and take the dictionary form, take the 다 off like always, and then just add 지만. So something else to point out is that when the subjects of your clauses are different, you want to use 은 and 는 in your construction because that is going to help you show the contrast because you are changing the subject of the sentence or the topic of the sentence, either way you want to think about it. If those two subjects are different, you want to use 는 rather than 이가. So the first part of the conversation they've given us on page 20, first person says 저기 분수가 있어요, which means over there's a fountain. And then the second person answers 음악 분수지만 노래가 안 나와요. So it's a music fountain, but 지만 the song isn't coming out, meaning the song isn't playing. And so also notice here that it's 노래가 안 나와요, because 나오다 takes 이 or 가 or 은 or 는. It doesn't take 을 or 를, which would make sense in English because it's an object. It doesn't make sense like that in Korean. So you want to use 가 or 이 if it's applicable for 나오다, or 은 or 는 if that's applicable. So don't use the object particle, use either the topic or the subject marking particle with 나오다. So on page 21, they give you some more examples using 지만. The first one is 떡볶이가 맵지만 맛있어요. So you can see here we're using 가 because the subject is the same in both of the clauses. The first clause is 떡볶이가 맵지만. That 지만 is connecting the two. The first part is just 떡볶이 is spicy. And then the second clause is 맛있어요. So they don't repeat 떡볶이 because it's not necessary. It's understood from the sentence that your subject is the same in both clauses. So you're saying that the 떡볶이 is spicy, but it's also delicious. The second one is 구두가 예쁘지만 불편해요. So shoes, I think the language pen translates 구두 as just shoes, but that's probably more accurately thought of as like dress shoes. I think of it as heels, but it could also be like dress shoes in general. So not just like regular tennis shoes, it's dress shoes. So dress shoes are pretty, but they're uncomfortable. Then the next sentence is 동생은 김치를 먹지만 저는 안 먹어요. So here you can see we're using 은 and 는 instead of 이 or 가 like the first two sentences because the first clause subject is 동생. So, you're talking yourself, you're saying your younger sibling. And then the second clause, the subject is yourself, 저는. So you have to use 는 here because the two subjects are different. So 동생은 김치를 먹지만 저는 안 먹어요. My younger sibling eats kimchi, but I don't. The next sentence is 미국 사람이지만 미국에 살지 않아요, which means I'm an American, but I don't live in America. And then the final sentence is 저는 암이지만 친구는 아미가 아니에요. So again, there you're using 는 because the subjects of the clauses are different. The first subject is you, yourself, and the second subject is your friend. So we're using 는 instead of 이가, and this is, of course, the noun construction. So ami ends in a vowel, so you're going to just use 지만. Moving on to the second key expression, this is on page 22 and 23. This is 고 싶다 and 고 싶어 하다. So the difference here is 고 싶다 is used to indicate what a subject wants or wants to do, and 고 싶어 하다 means the same thing but is used for third-person subjects. So, for example, when you are talking about yourself and what you want to do, you're going to use 고 싶다 as your construction. And if you are talking directly to someone else, like asking them what they want to do, just speaking directly to another person, you're still going to use 고 싶다. But if you are speaking about a third person in third person form, you're going to use 고 싶어 하다. So in the example conversation on page 22, the first person says, 지금 사진 찍고 싶어요, which means I want to take a photo right now. And you can see that the verb 찍다 for take a photo, dictionary form 찍다, take off 다, just add 고. So 찍고, again, that's going to be for all of the verbs. So for all action verbs, 고 싶다 is only for action verbs. Any action verb, you take off 다 and just add 고, and then you conjugate the 싶다 part. So you don't conjugate the first part of the verb, the actual action verb. You're only conjugating it by adding the 고 on the end, but that's going to add to any action verb, so you don't have to worry about conjugating that part. The part that you're going to conjugate is 싶다. So 요 form is just 싶어요. 씁니다 form is 싶습니다. The second person responds 여기 서세요, which is command form, so please stand here. 서다 is to stand, please stand here. 하나, 둘, 셋, 김치. So it's like 1, 2, 3, cheese, kind of. Of course, you don't have to say that. You could just say 1, 2, 3, but kimchi, some people will say that when they take a photo. So there are more example sentences on page 23. The first one is 저는 그 책을 읽고 싶어요. 저는 그 책을 읽고 싶어요. So the 저는 is in parentheses because you could just say 그 책을 읽고 싶어요. And if you just say that in context, it's going to mean that you want to read that book. Or if you are already talking about the other person in the conversation, then it could mean that you're talking about that other person wanting to read the book. But we know this isn't a third person outside of the conversation wanting to read that book because it's 싶어요 instead of 싶어해요. The second sentence is 주말에 어디에 가고 싶어요? 주말에 어디에 가고 싶어요? Where do you want to go on the weekend? So you can still use the 싶어요 form for asking a question because you're not talking about a third person, you're talking directly to someone else. The third sentence is our example of third person conjugation. So you're not talking to Sophia, so that's why this is third person. So 소피아는 노래를 듣고 싶어 해요. Sophia wants to listen to a song. And the fourth one is the same thing. They're talking about someone who is not in the conversation. 에릭은 영화를 보고 싶어 해요. So that means Eric wants to watch a movie. So on page 24, we have the full conversation for this chapter. I will go ahead and read it, but definitely go back with your language pen later and listen to the native pronunciations. 저기 분수가 있어요. 음악 분수지만 노래가 안 나와요. 여기 시간표가 있어요. 곧 시작해요. So this is a new sentence we haven't seen yet. So is just kind of like saying oh in English. It's just like an interjection. 여기 시간표가 있어요. So if you remember in the first book, one of the chapters, we learned concert ticket, which was 콘서트표. So this 표 is different. It sounds the same, it's spelled the same, but it doesn't mean ticket. So that doesn't mean time ticket. That actually means timetable, or like a schedule, kind of, like a posted schedule timetable for the music fountain. So that's what they're looking at. They're looking at a timetable. 곧 시작해요. So it will start soon. 곧 is just soon, and then 시작하다 is the verb for to start or to begin. So then in the second part, the first person says 우와, which is kind of like saying wow in English. It's again just an interjection like 방탄소년단 노래가 나와요. 지금 사진 찍고 싶어요. 여기 서세요. 하나, 둘, 셋, 김치. So that's the part we've already had. The first sentence there, of course, we didn't have earlier, but that one everyone should know by now because that's really easy, just BTS song. It's literally like saying a BTS song is coming out, but it means in context a BTS song is playing from the fountain. So I'll read it all through one more time without any explanations. 저기 분수가 있어요. 음악 분수지만 노래가 안 나와요. 여기 시간표가 있어요. 곧 시작해요. 와, 방탄소년단 노래가 나와요. 지금 사진 찍고 싶어요. 여기 서세요. 하나, 둘, 셋, 김치. So yeah, if you can't tell, I really hate reading things with exclamation points. It just feels really awkward reading that by myself. Anyway, we're going to move on to this bottom part of page 24. There is a section here that is counters. So it's like units of measurement. So as you can see here, there are several photos of different types of items, and underneath it we have basically the construction of how you count things, nouns in Korean. So they're giving you different numbers and different types of items so that you can see some of the different types of counters that you would have to use. So the construction is whatever noun we're talking about, the number, and then the counter. So for example, in the first photo, that's an army bomb. So we have the noun army bomb, the number 1. So han, not hana, because this is modifying the counter. And the counter that we're going to use is just the general counter for nouns, which is ke. So that's like saying things. So it's like army bomb, one thing, but just means one army bomb. So because 1 is coming before this unit, we're not counting out loud like we're saying 1, 2, 3, take a picture. It's actually just han instead of hana. So army bomb, 한 개, 1 army bomb. 커피 2잔, 2 cups of coffee. 강아지 3마리, 3 puppies. 앨범 4장, 4 albums. 주스 5병, 5 bottles of juice. 자동차 6대, 6 cars. You can also just use 차, the last part of that word, 차, for car instead of 자동차. 멤버 7명. So this 명 means people, and that's sort of a normal level of politeness, 명. If you need to be more formal in a certain situation, 명 actually changes to 분. 노래 11곡. 노래 11곡. So 곡 is like track or song. 책 20권. So 권 for books. 책, of course, for the noun. And here is 20, so 20, not 스물. That ryu gets dropped, sort of like hana gets condensed when it's 20 before some other thing, like a unit of measurement. So because it comes before guan, it's just 스물. So 스물 guan, not 스물 guan. And then you can see in the next one, it's no longer 20 in front of the counter, it's 21. So it ends up being 스물, the full word for 20, and then han for 1. So 스물한 살 for 21 years of age. There's another example sentence on, or example conversation rather, on page 25. This is the part of the exercises technically where you're supposed to listen and read aloud. So I definitely recommend doing that. I will go ahead and go through it once, and then you can go through it after. So first person says, 우리 카페에 가요. So we're going to cafe, or let's go to a cafe. Second person, 같이 가고 싶지만 너무 피곤해요. So I want to go together with you, but I'm tired. And the first person says, 친구들은 쉬고 싶어 해요. 우리만 카페에 가요. So my friends want to rest. Again, third person conversation because she's now talking to someone else. So she's saying, my friends want to rest. So just the two of us will go to the cafe. And the third person says, 그래요. 같이 커피 한 잔 마셔요. Says, sure, let's go drink a cup of coffee together. So that like 커피 한 잔 마셔요 is kind of like a common construction. That 커피 could change to alcohol, for example. So like 술 한 잔 마셔요. So that is it for chapter 7. I will see you in the supplementary lecture.